I'm Edith Guzman with Tree People, and this is my partner in crime, Rachel Malloridge, who's now with KYCC, and we are presenting brand new research to you. We are literally just finishing it up now. So we're excited to have you be our first guinea pigs to see all of this. Today's presentation will cover essentially what the context is for why we were interested in looking into how we can engage especially environmental justice communities in taking care of trees, specifically street trees. And we'll talk to you about the tool that we use, the approach of community-based social marketing, as well as the target community that we worked in, Huntington Park in the southeast part of the county. And we'll tell you about, of course, the project team and the study, as well as what early findings and implications from the study that we have identified.
So diving into the challenges of urban forest stewardship, we've already heard about some of the challenges facing our urban forest today, polyphagia shothole borer, drought. Fortunately, we've been having more and more funding available for tree planting over the past several years, but what's the biggest challenge to planting trees in this area specifically? It's watering those trees. And how, fortunately, we've been getting increased funding for that watering, but how can we better engage community members to do some of that watering? The pictures here, very first tree planting with Tree People in 2007 on the same block. One was adopted by the business owner, the other one is in front of a bus stop where it's very desperately needed, but not as well cared for, and obviously we want to have that investment in the planting of trees turn into canopy that shade our streets. So how can we get folks to water those trees?
So community-based social marketing, if you're not familiar with it, I hope you will become familiar with it just through the course of the presentation. But essentially, the issue is that information-based campaigns, it's been found that they rarely really move the needle in terms of behavior change. So what's the alternative? This, as you can see by these 5 steps, is a fairly rigorous approach to identifying specifically what the benefits and barriers are to a specific behavior or sets of behaviors. Rather than throwing information at people and hoping that they change their behaviors, it is designed to work specifically within the community, through the community, and to address those benefits and barriers to the behaviors. And I should say that CBSM is essentially established through social science mechanisms, including environmental psychology and social marketing.
And I'll just add that as anyone who's worked with me over the past years would know that I care deeply about serving these environmental justice communities that we're going to be talking about. And I found community-based social marketing to be particularly compelling because it emphasizes that aspect of listening that I've seen as being key in helping these communities and really serving them well. This has many layers in which we listen and listen again and check our assumptions and really try and get to the heart of why people are or are not taking a certain behavior. So why Huntington Park? We have here on our map, we've got this 3 square mile city in southeast LA County. We chose this community for 2 reasons. One was convenience. We had a really strong relationship with the city there, as well as a known presence with some community groups in the area, had been doing work there since 2010. And then the second reason is it has very similar socioeconomic conditions as well as cultural attitudes towards cultural values that we have in the other areas that are getting tree planting focus right now with the funding available.
The project team included, of course, Tree People and the city of Huntington Park, but we really couldn't have done this without the opportunity to hire a consulting firm that specializes in CBSM. They're called Action Research, and they're out of Oceanside. And that's really the funding through the LA Center is what allowed us to do that. We were also able to partner with Cal State Northridge, specifically their anthropology department, to help us with some focus groups, which you will hear about. And we're grateful that KYCC, when Rachel transitioned to that organization, was supportive of Rachel continuing to do some of that work. And you can see that a lot of people were involved in this. We had a really powerful regional manager in Huntington Park that mobilized an incredible number of volunteers and interns to support this. And funding, as I mentioned, the LA Center was instrumental. We also received funding from Boeing, and we're very grateful for that. So, step 1 is really about identifying your audience and your behaviors. It might be a surprise to some that the public that's not an audience. That's too amorphous. So we really needed to look at who was our audience. So we drilled down and specifically identified that we were looking at mobilizing residents whose home was adjacent to newly planted street trees in this community. And we say residents, not homeowners, because you have both homeowners and renters in this community, of course. And the behavior, tree care, likewise, is not a behavior. It's a set of distinct behaviors. And what you're looking for in CBSM is to identify end state, non-divisible behaviors. That is, behaviors that can't be broken down further and behaviors that produce the desired environmental outcome. So it was drilled down to these four. Checking soil moisture weekly to determine whether watering was needed, and if so, going ahead and watering. And then on a monthly basis, checking whether there are weeds that needed to be removed. And then on a twice-yearly basis, checking to see whether any mulching was needed, any supplemental mulching was needed. So step 2 was to identify the benefits and barriers now that we knew who our audience was and which behaviors we were targeting. We started with the literature review that originally just looked at Huntington Park specifically, demographics, some of the cultural characteristics around these behaviors. And then we surveyed other literature as well, looking at attitudes toward urban trees and urban tree programs, motivation to participate in environmental stewardship programs, and then motivation specifically to plant trees or participate in tree planting programs. And we did try to identify literature that would pertain to communities that we thought were like Huntington Park. That wasn't always possible, however. From there, we conducted 2 focus groups. With the literature that we reviewed, we felt like we were ready to put together a couple of focus groups. We did 2 separate focus groups, one with a group of individuals from Huntington Park that was participating or had recently participated in tree care behaviors, and then another one which had not. And the reason for splitting those up is that we didn't want the people in the non-tree care group to feel somehow like they didn't have much of a voice. And the findings in general are that trees are valued in both groups. We found trees are valued in this community, but they also have been a cause for problems, whether that might be litter or sidewalks, etc. There are not enough trees. By and large, everybody agreed that they would like to see more trees in Huntington Park because they do value them. Importantly, we found that the perception is, well, the city is responsible. Why aren't they taking care of the trees? So this was identified as a big barrier, perceptual barrier. And then there was also the perception out there that tree care is expensive, specifically that watering requires too much of their money to do. So we had begun to identify some of the issues that we knew we would have to address through our program. At that point, we were then able to create a survey. So we were able to go out with our youth from the community to conduct door-to-door surveys based on the literature review and the focus groups. And we found that, and this is on a scale from 1 to 7, and I'm sure you all can't see everything here, but we found that essentially there's a really high regard for trees. Trees are beautiful to look at. Watering is important for the health of the tree. How important is it to have well-maintained streets and sidewalks? It's very important. So there's a lot of affinity towards trees and generally an understanding that trees are very important and that they provide various benefits. We also found that there weren't really infrastructural barriers in this community. In other words, it's possible for people to go out and water trees. They have, for the most part, they have spigots in their front yards. They have hoses that they can attach to that front spigot, and the hose is long enough to reach the parkway. So generally speaking, this is what we found. And this was important because we were looking both at identifying perceptual as well as tangible or practical barriers. In terms of barriers to tree care, as the focus groups foreshadowed, we saw that there's a very strong perception that it's the city's responsibility to take care of trees. And the second most significant barrier was this issue of cost. It's expensive to water my tree. So now we were beginning to hone in on the issues that we knew we wanted to address. Benefits to tree care, again, as we saw with attitudes to trees, there's a really strong understanding that it's important to take care of trees and that trees will pay you back. So taking care of my tree will make the street look nice. It will make my yard look nice. It will encourage people to be outside, etc. So there's a good understanding of those issues in this community. We then asked participants, are they more likely, essentially, to go out there and water their tree if they're asked by the city versus a community group? And we found that essentially, I mean, there was a slight variation, but people were somewhat likely or very likely for the most part. More than three quarters or 80% of folks went ahead and said that in either scenario they would be fairly likely to do it, right? So then we developed some materials based on all of this information.
Yeah, and some of the materials, you need to have a really strong understanding of what kind of tools are in that community-based social marketing toolkit to understand completely why we picked these tools, but we'll cover pretty briefly. The one that we don't have a picture of is a letter that we crafted. And within that letter, I have so many things to say about why trees are beneficial and why you should care for them, but we chucked all of our usual language out and said, okay, what have we heard? We're worried that this costs too much and that it's the city's responsibility, but the people really would like to have more trees. And so we used those pieces of information to craft a very short letter that focused on, did you know that the city, that we're trying to plant more trees, that it isn't their responsibility to do this weekly watering necessarily, that you'd be great for you to help, and go through some really specific language to be concise, which is always a challenge for me, but we found a way. So we did that letter along with including 2 pictures that were local. We had a picture of a street that didn't have any trees in the local neighborhood, and one that did have really nice canopy cover on the border with Southgate. But there it is. So we had these images of their neighborhood, what it can look like, what they know it can look like because they live there, and a street that looks like more of the streets. Next we have here, this is a magnet. It's about this big that has instructions on how to check if your tree needs water and to water it. And on there, you see on the bottom, we've included a carton of eggs. Not because you should crack them open on the tree, but we wanted to emphasize to folks that it only costs $5 a year for you to go out and give it that 15 gallons of water that it may need as much as on a weekly basis. So really making it front and center in this reminder of what they should be doing when they go to water the tree, that it isn't going to be cost prohibitive for them. So addressing that specifically. Now we have an air freshener. Now why, or we were just having fun, right? Let's have air fresheners. No, so what we chose to do at this point is we realized that we wanted to tie watering their tree to an existing weekly behavior. So when many of you at some point talked to me and I was like, we're going to do it with taking out the trash. You're going to roll out their trash can. There's going to be a sticker on the side that says water your tree. That's a weekly behavior for some communities. But in Huntington Park, it isn't. Their trash cans are dumpsters on the alley, so they aren't walking out past their tree to put it out there. And they may go out and dump the trash multiple times a week because they don't have to roll out a bin. But in this neighborhood where parking is at a premium, like a lot of Los Angeles, but this is also a very heavy pedestrian community, so they have cars, but they usually are walking because they don't want to have to find parking later. They do have to move their car once a week for street sweeping.
And so most homes don't have their own space. Yeah. It's a street parking community.
It's rough. So I took the Metro and Bike a couple times to avoid having to find parking for this project. So we chose the air freshener as a prompt. This is a reminder for them, hey, you need to water your tree, and we tied it to that weekly behavior of moving their car.
And conveniently, it's tree-shaped.
The design for this was done by, so the youth that were involved in this program actually played a huge role in this program, both in I had them out doing surveys, and I didn't do any of the surveys. I was the one carrying the water and the gift cards for the survey participants, but we had the young people going in pairs, knocking door to door, and one of them designed this logo because one of the tools within community-based social marketing is you want to start building social norms. You want it to have social diffusion of this behavior that you want people engaging in. So we made this as a static cling sticker that they could put inside their front window to say we care for trees and emphasize that this is a community value, that this is important for us. And there it is all together. How do we get it out to the folks in the community? So, and there's the letter right there you can see the red and green arrows going down to those 2 pictures. So I am a big proponent personally of going and talking to people individually. I think having an in-person conversation is valuable. However, that's very time consuming, especially for the municipalities and organizations that are doing tree planting. And so we wanted to say, what happens? Is there a difference between my talking to someone and giving them this material and asking them to commit to watering their tree and just leaving this very strategic material for them? Is there a difference? And is it significant so that it would be worth the while of an organization who maybe doesn't do community-based events like Tree People to use this in-person methodology for delivering these materials? So here we have Christina Basorto, our community organizer, and some of the youth. There's more standing in the yard getting trained the morning of a pilot event. On March 4th, we had the youth go into the community and take half of the addresses that we had and knock on the door, talk to the homeowner if they answered, go do some tree care and show them, and if they didn't answer the door, still do tree care in the hopes that they come out and say, what are you doing with my tree? And attempt to engage with them. And
Which
then,
happened a couple times.
yes, okay. And then the other half of the trees, I picked up some students that had finished an AP test exam or something, a practice test, and we went to the other half of the addresses and just dropped off that bag. So on half the address, we dropped off the bag, other half, we attempted to talk to folks.
And demonstrate.
Proper tree care. So here we are on the right. There are my folks walking down the street. You see that yellow trumpet right there, and then the other group doing the tree care. And my group ran into a lot of gates, so we left them hanging on the outside of the gate. It was really interesting. It was also prior to the election in Huntington Park, so there was other folks knocking on doors trying to get people to talk to the candidates and that kind of thing. But we left some on the gates, and then Edith was part of the group that was doing the tree care and talking to folks. And what followed, Christina was coming off of medical leave and was kind of like, I don't know if I'm working hard enough, weeks prior to this starting, and I said, just wait, because then she had to go out every other day for 6 weeks and measure the soil moisture. So she had 4 interns that rotated and helped her go to those 72 trees and test the soil moisture every other day so that we could, without being intrusive and asking the homeowner, hey, are you watering, what was happening with those plants. And then they were also weekly observing whether there was weeds, mulch, with how healthy was the tree looking, take a photo, and note if they talked to the homeowner or if anything happened, if her dog chased them and didn't get to do the soil moisture reading.
And the soil moisture readings, I'll say, were really the primary thing that we were very concerned about. We also looked at these other weekly measures, but within a 6-week period, there's only so much that you can really observe in that. But we do feel really confident about the soil moisture.
And we also know that the watering is the make or break issue. As a tree person, I care about all those things happening so that we have the healthiest trees possible in our communities. But if they don't get water, we know that there's just no way that they're going to make it. So we really focused on that as our end state behavior.
Yeah. So what did we find 6 weeks in? We found the orange is the active homes, so the homes where we engaged with individuals and showed them proper tree care, attempted to get verbal commitment from them, etc. And then the green is the passive, and this is a soil moisture as volumetric water content. So it's basically a percent of how moist the soil is. So we see that by and large there is a difference between the two. There's also, we did take baseline measures before going out to and doing the outreach, so you can see that in both instances there is improvement compared to baseline, but that trees, that soil was significantly more moist for the homes that received the active in-person participation. We also looked at presence of mulch, and what we see here is that, again, the active homes had a better outcome than the ones that received a more passive approach, and similarly with weeds. So the really big spike there that you can see, this is absence of weeds. This can be explained by the fact that the homes that received the active outreach were also subject to a demonstration of good tree care, which included removal of weeds. Again, this is something where we would want to come back and see, is the absence of weeds maintained over a longer period of time? 6 weeks it's not quite long enough for that. And we also measured overall tree health, just in a 4 kind of condition stage. And in passive outreach, we saw, there was a lot of fair by the end, but there was not, not a lot of trees that were rated as good. Whereas with active outreach, we saw that generally speaking, there were better conditions for those trees that were reported. So what does it all mean? Active in-person outreach as compared to passive, we were able to observe that soil was significantly more moist, and there was more mulch and better observed tree care, or tree health rather, in general. But it's also important to note that both of the groups did see better outcomes than this pre-outreach baseline. So, the question is, do we do it at all? We'd say the answer is yes, and if it's possible, in-person engagement does make a difference. That is supposed to show you that the Journal of Arboriculture and Urban Forestry has received a manuscript from us just 4 days ago. So there will be, hopefully it will be accepted and published, but we have detailed the methodology and the outcomes of this study in that article, and we do still have a few things to finalize, and the next steps include.
So we're still waiting for extra research to do the return on investment calculations for us. But obviously, we're talking about 72 trees in one community, and ideally, I would love to see, and I've had thoughts over time, but looking at some other projects that are really reliant on those permission to plant forms, where we're relying on homeowners to do the watering, seeing if there's ways that we can pick a couple of those projects that are happening in this area, and testing it again on some of those trees. Because it's a small group in a small geographic area. So I'd really like to see that. We might have to do things like tweaking, maybe it's not an air freshener, maybe there's a different weekly behavior we want to tie it to, but that's really my hope. The other thing is looking at the long term, so seeing if, after not just a 6-week period, but beyond that, do you really see a measured increase? The other strategy I didn't mention that we wanted to implement was using the Remind app, and this is another idea that came from our students who Christina had been using this app to text them. It sends text messages. You don't have the person's personal information. They sign up, much like what we're doing with Pull Everywhere, right? They don't have our information, but we can tap into the system and receive information. They really like that system for getting notifications about events, and said, hey, can we enroll, let's have the homeowners enroll in that so they can get a weekly reminder via text that they can opt out of at any time. But we didn't have very many folks enroll in it when we started the pilot. So that's one that I still think might be interesting to look at as that way for them to receive this text message once a week, but it wasn't utilized within this pilot project. So.
But the good news is that we have many more tree plantings that are scheduled or will be scheduled in this community, so we have an opportunity to test out some of these approaches and continue to see whether we can get more and more stewardship within this community.
And the social norm piece, similarly, I'm guessing that one of the questions someone might have is, how much of the static cling sticker did we see in those front windows? And I don't think we saw very many, at least when we'd last spoken with Christina. But again, as the program rolled out, I wonder if that would become more widely used, as people start to see other people using it. So,
and to be fair, we didn't. We should have built into this observations of whether any of those public-facing pieces did in fact end up getting used in the way that they were intended. And we did sort of anecdotal observations, but it wasn't a very sort of structured approach. And that is what we have for you.